off. Okay, cool. And if folks have any issues kind of having this recorded and being present, just feel free to let us know. I think it's one of those things where I know it's sensitive for some folks. So, okay, yeah. So let me share my screen real quick. Cool. Can folks see the Google slide presentation?
Yes.
Sweet. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So yeah, again, welcome everyone today to today's session, Redefining Wellness, Bridging Mental Health in Our Environment. It's a collab effort with a number of panelists. Grateful to have them here today, and a number of different orgs that kind of focus on, again, these topics of mention. So yeah, I think purpose of the event, Nicholas, I know you mentioned that I can chime in on this, and folks feel free to mention as well, but a big part of it is trying to reconcile kind of how our mental health and the state of the environment, with a lot going on in the world, how it affects each other, and how we can really be able to maintain ourselves and how we feel, but then also just how to create, again, a just, equitable, sustainable future. So from those lenses, but yeah, team, if you have any other kind of call outs, feel free to mention. Cool. But yeah, so here are the folks that we have on, at least who kind of helped bring this session together. So from Sustainable Asian Traits.
Yeah, hey, what's up? My name's Paula. I'm from Sustainable. I was one of the founders of Sustainable Asian Traits. Really, our goal is to amplify Asian voices in the sustainability movement. I think, talking about zero waste, talking about the environment is a very hot topic right now, and we just really want to make sure the Asian voices in that movement are well highlighted.
Yeah, and then on behalf of Waves, so Waves is a just casual grassroots conversational group meant to destigmatize mental health, especially via conversation, and just provides a safe space, brave space to really just talk about topics without any pretenses, stereotypes, stigma, and just to hold that open area for us to really be have these conversations. And Subtle Asian Activists.
So Subtle Asian Activists we are an Asian-centered activist community space which focus on discussion and learning, and we generally support all progressive movements across the world.
Great, thanks, Nicholas. Okay, so yeah. So some housekeeping rules for events like this. We usually want to make sure that everyone's kind of gets a sense of what's going on, but also to make sure folks feel comfortable throughout the course of the event. So to start, audio will be off until breakout starts. We'll primarily keep it with focus on panel. So I think we should be good to go there, but do feel free to include some questions, comments, reactions in the chat. We always enjoy that additional conversation, folks just really kind of exchanging ideas, talking about things where, I mean, that's why we're here, just to be able to have those conversations and talk about things that kind of really spark your juices, ideas, interests going. If something does come up, feel free to raise your hand for assistance. So we should be able to have that on the Zoom features, hopefully, sadly enough that everyone should be somewhat familiar. We do still have, as the team's discovered, that we still have Zoom issues to this day. So everyone who is logging into the from the link I provided, they showed up as Christian DeLuna. That's me, by the way. So if you are listed as a Christian DeLuna and you are not indeed a Christian DeLuna, feel free to change your name accordingly. And then with that, update name and pronouns in general. So yeah, feel free to, you should be able to rename that on the side. And yeah, if you have preferred pronouns or whatever you want folks to refer to you as, just we want to be able to make sure folks are addressed as as the preference is. And lastly, usually most importantly, a lot of topics we discuss are pretty heavy, and sometimes they do evoke feelings that kind of require a bit of a step back. And yeah, it's one of those things too, where if you need to take a break, turn your camera off, etc., by all means, please do. We're all Zoom fatigued by this point in our lives, so we know how difficult it can be to just jump on these sessions every so often and kind of be putting at that that weird kind of digital space. So and then even in the breakout rooms too, if you are more inclined to kind of be, you know, fly on the wall, you just want to hear what the topics are about, that's perfectly fine as well. Again, we're just here to create space for folks to listen, hear stories, hear events, hear just a lot of different things to hopefully inspire some new ideas in folks' lives. So yeah. Okay, cool. So for today's panelists, I'll give a rough preview here. We'll share out this slide deck at some point later. I'll have to do some cleanup to just kind of make it more presentable, but just like as a resource for folks. But I'm going to stop my share so that way we can see some faces. It's always more enjoyable when we can see everyone. So, but yeah, I think maybe why don't we start with, I think we had Warren first. So Warren, if you're able to kind of give us a brief intro to you and yourself, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Warren. I think I'm the only Canadian at the panel right now. I'm based in around Toronto, Ontario. I'm a past tech worker, but now I've mostly moved into the legal sphere. I do policy, specifically do a lot of progressive policy work, and involved with a lot of different progressive organizations that work from everything for housing, criminal justice reform, and I'm currently involved in some divest from fossil fuel movements. So it's great to be here, and yeah, I'm Toronto based and set to work in consumer protection law. So that's a bit about me.
Great, thanks so much, Warren. Thank you for being here. Ian.
Hey everybody, I apologize for that giant bio. I am based in Michigan, so maybe not too far away from Canada, right at the border in Detroit, but reaching you right now on Piscataway lands in the Baltimore region. And my background is a mix of environmental science, but also some political, and I think maybe I'll get into the backstory for the comic book adventure that we'll get into later. But I'm still active in advocacy and have worked with various communities in maybe some unusual ways. So I don't want to talk too much. I probably already have. We'll pass the torch.
No, not at all. Yeah, no, I think we'll definitely have more space and room for everyone to get to know each other a bit more. So, but yeah, no, definitely great primer and happy to have you on board. Yvonne.
Hi everyone, Yvonne Quaresma here, Filipino American. I did my undergrad in business finance, and then I continued on to grad school with a master's in food studies, which is a very unique program, but it is studying food insecurity and food waste. And when I was set to graduate from NYU in May of 2020, the pandemic kind of took over and led me to starting Climate Journal Project, just because I was feeling very, I don't know, unstable from, contributing my efforts towards social and environmental impact. So, food insecurity and food waste has always been my passion. And but on the bright side, it has led me to Climate Journal Project. So I've been running Climate Journal Project since May of 2020, which is a really cool kind of turning of my leaf. So if you all journal, I'm excited to talk about that as a ways to alleviate a lot of anxiety.
Great, thanks, Yvonne. And last but not least, Linda.
Yvonne. Hi, friends. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to wherever you are in the world. I was born in Vietnam and raised in Australia, and these days I live and work on the traditional lands of the Tanana Athabascan people of interior Alaska, so right next door to Canada, as I like to call our neighbours. These days I work as a trauma therapist and as a somatic therapist. However, the journey to getting here has led me to Alaska, and I got to experience the healing forces of the land. I live in a small cabin in the woods, 550 square feet, that my husband and I built ourselves outside of city limits. No building code, no planning permits, no council approvals. We hunt, we fish, we grow our own vegetables, we forage, and we preserve the harvest. And shifting out of the extractive philosophical relationship and extractive economic relationship with the land has caused me to move out of an extractive philosophical and economic relationship with myself. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing with you all today in community.
Thanks, Linda. Always a pleasure to have you on board. Great. Yeah, no, so again, I think super excited to have so many folks on board coming from so many different walks of life, avenues, stories. I think that's one of the things we really treasure at these events, being able to bring some of these views together, especially from the Asian lens and some of those unique affordances from our collective cultural history and backgrounds. So yeah, definitely excited to dive in for today's session. And then before we do kind of jump in, one of the things we always enjoy doing is an exercise of just mentioning 3 words of how you're feeling right now, just kind of a mental health check. It goes a long way to sometimes take that step back and just reflect and see where you're at. So yeah, let's get feel free to put it in the chat. Give folks maybe like 3-4 minutes to log things out, and yeah, we'll regroup as we go along. Excited, busy, tired, grateful, hopeful, tired, inspired, happy, tired, eager, elated. Man, these kind of came in, I think, simultaneously. There's no real like coordinated strike on this, but seems to be tired is a running trend. Yeah, I mean, there definitely is very much ample good reason to be tired. It's been a doozy of the last few years, and hopefully kind of turning the corner on some of these things. But yeah, no, so hopefully again, always grateful, glad that folks, especially when you're kind of feeling beaten, worn and down and all that, just being able to show up and be present and hopefully use the time to kind of help yourself out and just give yourself that space to really step back and enjoy some of the more excitable things in the world, the more things that make you kind of feel good. So
if I could make a suggestion, Christian. So it looks like some folks are working through a lot, some challenges and emotional whiplash I saw. Perhaps we could just set an intentional breath together and kind of just share, oxygenate in shared spirits. So let's kind of breathe in. You can stretch up also, that can help. And then you can hold for a couple. And we'll breathe out slowly. Bring your arms down. Well, we can do that again. gonna open up. And then I'm gonna breathe out. So I'll give thanks also, acknowledge my grandmother, Bangwai. And I had a dream, the first dream I ever had of her was that where we could speak fluently with one another. She was up on a mountain, and I asked, what, how are you so vibrant, basically, and she said clean air is important. And so that was it's something that I thought, maybe I could share that with all of you, give an opportunity to clean the air that's in you, and maybe take note and set tone in terms of mental health and our relationship with the environment from an Asian lens, or subtle Asian lens for some of us like me, I suppose. So anyways, that's all.
No, thanks for sharing that, Ian. It's super great to hear that. And I guess that's actually maybe a little bit of a deviation from the script, but if anybody else kind of wants to just provide an intention on what brought them here today and what they're hoping to really keep in mind as we go through it, by all means, feel free to mention. I can definitely follow just to kind of get the floor going. But yeah, I think for me, at the end of the day, like a lot of these events are very close to me to just really hear from people. It's not something that we do on the day-to-day too often. And I really kind of just want to have folks help folks be as comfortable and at ease to just enjoy a little bit of a step out from whatever busyness, tiredness that is kind of waiting for you afterwards, but just to be here in the moment and hoping to help facilitate that and make that happen for folks. So yeah. If anybody else wants to jump in, feel free, no pressure as always, but just opening some of that space up.
The last panel discussion that I was involved in with this beautiful community was about Monolith to Mosaic. And I'd like to set the intention of celebrating all the many ways in which it is possible to be an activist, all the ways in which it is possible to have a voice and to take action. And if the action is entertaining the idea of the possibility, then that's still a baby step. It's still action. And in the spirit of that, to have a space where we can share, without judgment about not enough, because that's that scarcity culture that is the basis of colonizer settler culture, that there's never enough. Yeah, and there could always be more. Yeah. So to celebrate.
Thanks, Linda. Always so relaxing to hear you speak. Love it. Yes. Anybody else have anything they'd like to call out? Great.
I guess I want to check in, especially for the first person who shared that they were feeling emotionally whiplashed. If anyone is feeling challenged with getting settled or working through, you just need like some coping tools. Earlier I shared with the Zoom like a guide for kind of quick response on grounding and breathing and things that kind of go into more just deeper process. But there's some, I'm not sure if that's up. I can paste it in again if that's useful for anyone. Just also in anticipation of some conversations too. So that's.
Yeah, no, and that's one thing. We will look to aggregate a lot of the resources shared throughout the course of the event chat. We do have some mentions towards them, and we'll look to distribute post-event. And if folks, even just from our attendees, have that interest in sharing whatever resource, by all means, feel free to include as well. Always happy to see what folks might have encountered along the way on their ends. All right. So with that in mind, why don't we jump into our panel? I think we can definitely had a nice primer into some background, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of crosstalk, cross-pollination about ideas on kind of coming together and finding these next steps. But yeah, so I think the first question to pose is, what were your own lived experiences, the journey that led you to where you are right now? Yeah, again, we're really big on storytelling and just kind of seeing where folks came from and how they came, like what really shaped them and where that kind of really drives them to push towards in kind of where their life goes next. And yeah, so kind of going in order from Warren, if you'd be willing to start us off.
Yeah, sure. So I guess like Yvonne, I'm Filipino. I'm mixed Filipino specifically on my mother's side. And I think one of the things that kind of led me to get involved is I was born in Canada, born in a suburb outside of Toronto. But my grandfather, my lolo, was a politician back in the Philippines, municipal politician. And so I always grew up with lots of stories about how he was involved, but also when he would kind of challenge, like the political institutions aren't very stable in the Philippines, which we're um, see, seeing right now in this election and with the previous administration. And one of the reasons why he left is because he challenged the kleptocrat at the time, Ferdinand Marcos. And one of the reasons he left just before martial law. So he kind of had that reputation of kind of challenging power and standing up for what's right. And so that always kind of, I guess, reoriented my framework of how to get involved. So, kind of throughout the years, I would get involved. I mean, or let me phrase that. Throughout the years, maybe I was very like school focused. And then when I got to undergrad, it's like, okay, how do I get involved? And I started to here and there, not as much as I would like. I was involved with a lot of specifically a lot of the Asian groups at my undergrad, a place called Western University up in London, Ontario. And that was one way. We do a charity thing here and there. But what really interested me was like, how do you create some type of systemic change, like something greater than that? So I graduated and, it's just the goal was to kind of pay off my student debt right away. But I also always had my eyes on like law school because I saw that as, a way to kind of not only like get legitimacy to kind of hopefully influence certain institutions, but also kind of make your career as like a method to make some type of change. So I worked a couple years as a tech worker and traveled across America for a lot of it. So I've been everywhere from Wisconsin to New York to Chicago for it. And it kind of only reiterated my kind of desire to get into law school and be involved because that job was fine. I'm very grateful for it. It helped me pay off my undergrad debt, but didn't really kind of have that greater purpose I was looking for. So eventually I got into the law school of my choice. It took me 3 times. I got off the wait list. And I guess our law school is kind of known as like one of the more progressive ones. It's the first one in law school, but there's a lot of people doing a lot of great work, everything from workers' rights, the climate, etc. And so now that I'm kind of in here, I've really been doing my best to get involved. I think Linda brought up a great point earlier about how like everyone, there's different ways to kind of make your voice be heard. But now I'm around all these people, a lot of great activists, and I'm learning of new ways to increasingly make my voice be heard. So from there, that's when I really started joining as much groups that organized in person. I'm part of a couple groups, one that's involved with a lot of Filipino organizing about what's going back in the Philippines, but also here, right? Like how could you improve people's conditions here from kind of that outside perspective? And on that inside perspective, I've made an effort to be kind of a lawyer in the public sector, public interest. So number one, last summer I worked for a financial regulator. And then now post-grad, I'm set to work for a regulator that does consumer protection. And then on the time, I write some policy work, a lot of kind of progressive policy, really from everywhere, mostly like consumer oriented towards consumer oriented, be it like protecting people from financial fraud, or a piece I'm currently working for Canada's largest progressive policy institute about kind of digital rights, and kind of trying to find everywhere I could fit in. But also the environment has been a big part of it, because especially for those Filipino organizations that I'm part of, as we know, is that climate change is really going to hit the global south more than any part. I think it's estimated 50 million, 60 million climate refugees by 2030, right? But not like 2050, you see all these numbers, 2030, so less than 10 years from now. So that's something that I've been doing my best to kind of, use the legitimacy, like kind of a law degree does at like a top law school. And I have a critique of that. I think it's unfortunate. A lot of people only listen to you with those credentials, but I try doing what I can to kind of being involved in these groups and influence things from the outside and the inside. So I'm very like policy focused now, but also making sure that change comes from within the community. And I guess those are all the steps that kind of led, and starting with my grandfather, and currently led me to, I guess, this moment with all of you here.
Amazing. Thanks, Warren, for sharing that. I think it, yeah, it definitely is. Activism comes in all shapes and forms. Everyone has their own calling. And I think the path that you've taken, it definitely is inspired, for sure. Like I know, like I actually have some friends too, being a Filipino American, that they're family members as well, for differences, reasons had to kind of leave time too. But there's a lot of that inspiration of giving back and creating more of that kind of just society. And yeah, the work you're doing sounds fantastic, and helping us work towards that. Next, why don't we go to Ian? You can share a little bit of your backstory and where you come from.
So I'm diasporic Vietnamese, and a mix of some Japanese as well, for sure. And so I grew up in Southeast Michigan, in the Detroit region, and briefly had some time raised by my aunts and grandmother in LA as well. One of the things that I think really, I guess, catalyzed the way that I look at how social relationships turn out, mental health, trauma, and even, broader things like political strife, I guess, is probably coming from starting out in the household, and then being able to look further. And some of it was subtle in terms of realizing just kind of aspects of disarray growing up, and kind of there's some dysfunctional dynamics, and I wouldn't even downplay that, but it's just the real challenges in the family. And I pretty quickly realized that the behavior is transcendent, right? Like the way that people often look at how they treat one another, or vice versa, how they engage or relate with their environment is often, like I said, transcendent, or it's sort of it's reflected as well. So when people say, an environmentally friendly thing, is there actually a relationship there, or is it something that's more of an extractive thing? If you're growing up or just, even now, if you're around something that may be labeled as, let's say, a narcissistic dynamic, or something where there is an inequitable power relationship, what direction, what kind of, where's the attention or power or other aspects of your experience going? And when it comes to looking at trauma, for me, a key thing was recognizing, just trying to piece together a lot of things, right? And when it comes to looking at identity, as someone who's grown up Vietnamese American, I remember thinking for years until I was like a junior in college that that there was some sort of like guidebook or handbook to being a good American citizen, right? And that everybody had it, and it was just about like, you know, this is how you navigate what goes on in Congress or write to your senators and stuff. And I just thought nobody like read it or lost it. And then because we were an immigrant family, we just missed out, you know, and it's like, oh wow. But, you know, by the time I was in college, I realized after taking, I was in like an upper level political science class when I realized actually, no one knows what's going on at county government and things like that. That really kind of set a cue as far as like, you know, maybe maybe we're in more trouble than we think. And it's not just like an Asian thing. And as far as the region that we're in. And also when it comes to growing up, I guess where I'm at right now, a little, you know, I'm kind of going through all these nonlinear reflections, but I was really fortunate that my mother had a really close relationship with you know, growing, gardening, and also she had, I remember one of the recordings of, it was the Thomas Paine, is that right? Dominic Paine, I think. I'm forgetting the name. Paine humpback whale recordings, right? So these are just raw recordings of humpback whales in the 1960s. And you know, I also so I still remember having like toy whales in the bathtub, and I would, you know, play with them, and that was something I really loved. And Free Willy came out as well, and had an interesting dream where I guess like my grandfather was a whale. And I say this because very recently, like last year or earlier this year, I came to find that there are a lot of coastal villages in Vietnam that have an active relationship with whales. Like they're known for worshiping whales as deities. And you know, there's kind of this goodwill exchange where often a lot of fishermen and even some of the boat people, including some extended family that people know. some people, my goodness, in my extended family, some folks have known, have reported like being rescued by whales in rough waters. And so that kind of kinship relationship, I think, is something that I'm really at a point where I'm exploring and looking at in terms of sense of belonging and connection, right? With more than just trying to understand how do I fit in a place where, you know, you could look at colonialism and gentrification, for example, as parallels, or maybe neocolonialism, and also in terms of just trying to, again, like piece together all these different endeavors and of who you are and what your community is trying to do. And, you know, like unlike the diasporic African experience where there was kind of a uniform series of crises and events, you know, the Asian community is often, a lot of us probably grew up in ways where we didn't identify necessarily as Asian first. It was like Vietnamese American, Chinese American, Korean American. And now one of the things that I often see in a lot of advocacy spaces is more that like, well, what is Asian, right? Like, how come we're not in communication with Turkish people, or, you know, Mongolian and, you know, Sri Lankan or Nepalese or Iranian, you know, and so those are questions that I think, you know, when you look at some of the patterns between colonialism and some of the longer intergenerational challenges that come from, you know, abuse, also, you know, in my case, at least, aspects of colonialism, both Eastern and Western, right? As far as like, you know, probably that Japanese bit of my heritage, you know, there may have been some other dynamics that were involved with why the Japanese were in Vietnam. Those are things that I think as we really look at things from a place of what kind of care does this need? And, you know, that becomes a very universal question. And when it, you know, whether looking at the environment or ourselves, you know, from a very internal place. And when we look at some of the medicines that we have, like you know, that's also a thing that I think I'm really grateful for, which is that, you know, there are things like the bitter gourd, bitter melon, bitter squash, Kerala, whatever you want to call it, that bumpy squash, where, you know, like that was a staple kind of food that you kind of grew up with, and you questioned why you were eating it because it was so bitter. But when you look back and you find out that, you know, in Vedic medicine, it's used to treat parasites, or what I've learned from Filipino folks that, you know, it was a way to regulate insulin, right? That's almost an environmental strategy, except with our own inner biome, with how we are able to, yeah, just come to balance and you know, work with that. And obviously it is from the earth, of the earth, and that's a really important component as well. And then also things like Qigong, for example, right? There's a spatial dynamic to how we move and how we breathe and how we relate with both the air, the earth, and all of that. So I think that's what I'd say. I could talk about my professional stuff, but there's plenty of, you know, bios and stuff online at, you know, complex systems and strategy and advocacy, and all that, and green buildings or whatever else. So, you know, you could talk about that later, but I think that's a good, you know, backdrop before we assemble the rest of the Avengers. Okay.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, like I said, the stories that got you here, I always find more fascinating than the what do you do for a living. It's more informative about kind of that journey of what really drives you, what inspires you. And I think kind of like what you mentioned about kind of finding who you are and what your place is to fit in. And then you also mentioned like what is the concept, what is Asian? As mentioned, Linda was on our panel earlier about the Asian monolith and what does that mean? And it's just like Asian is massive. And what is our role? We all have our own different areas of effect, especially from the environmental lens. We all have our specific just areas that kind of have different influences. I mean, with the big, not to go too deeply into it, but like with this big COP26 conference, it was just like, how do different countries mediate, and like, how do we like actually affect that change? Like, what do we do at our own level, and what do folks do at the top? Because yeah, there's just a lot of talk, and it's like, how do you actually enact that? And I think, like you mentioned, Ian, there's kind of a lot that we just don't know what's going on between everyone, and having that whole holistic view is, I mean, it's impossible, but trying to get to know what you can and affect what you can in the where you are, I think that's definitely key, and hopefully something that we can all kind of tease out and figure out our next steps in that in today's chat. So, but yeah, thank you for sharing. Next, Yvonne, if you're able to share a bit where you come from, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, thank you all. So great to be here. What I didn't mention earlier was I was actually born in Saudi Arabia, but I am Filipino American. So born in Saudi Arabia, lived there until I was 7, always went to the Philippines. And for as long as I can remember, I always really cared about social and environmental impact. It just really, you know, tore on my heartstrings. Like, why is it that some people have more than others? Why is it that there's so much trash? And moving to New York after college just continued to strengthen that passion of mine. As I mentioned earlier, I was doing my master's in food studies. I thought I was doing really exactly what I wanted, but in that time, my thesis project was actually helping reduce food waste in restaurants all over New York City. So when the pandemic happened, all the restaurants that were participating in this program that I started with some colleagues, all of them either closed, and some of them never came back. And so it was a very sad time, a very big grieving period for not only for me, but for many of us. And I started to kind of question the importance and significance of my passion. And eventually I started to believe that maybe it wasn't as important as I was making it seem in my head. Maybe social and environmental impact wasn't gonna help make me a stable professional. Maybe all the research I was doing was all coming to an end anyways. And so I took a flight back to California to live back in my childhood bedroom with my parents. And lucky for me, I was surrounded by old, half, maybe 1/4 written in diaries is what I used to call them back then. But as an adult, I refer to them as a journal. And I started to fill in the pages, and I started to kind of, through a daily yoga practice and through a daily journal practice, I realized that the reason why I care so much about social and environmental impact and you and my relationship with me and you and the planet is because of my Asian identity. I go to the Philippines and I see the styrofoam that pile up on the streets and pile up in the beautiful oceans, and people only photograph a very small percentage of that beautiful beach, right? I see the air pollution and I see all of that, and I want to take care of not only my Filipino family members, but my other Asian family members and brothers and sisters. And so it took it took a pandemic and a start of a journal practice for me to realize that my passion for social and environmental impact wasn't really just a hobby. It was my way of protecting my ancestors, protecting my future children, you and I, my family, my identity. You know, I don't ever want the Philippine Islands to be lost and cluttered with plastics, and that's currently happening. And that's unfortunately the reality. But I also believe that it's hard to deconstruct those challenges. I just threw so many different issues to solve, but through the journal practice, I also realized that we are part of the planet. And to take care of the planet also means taking care of yourself. So in order to get to this strong place of planetary healing, we also need to prioritize internal healing. And that's really what the Climate Journal Project is about. And that's a little bit about me and really the force behind the Climate Journal Project. So thank you all for the time.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that kind of figuring out, again, that similar trend of figuring out who you are and what you value, and that introspection, I think really went a long way, and just kind of, I think it sounds like being able to, I think what you mentioned about taking care of yourself first before you can kind of figure out where your place is. I think that's huge to really make that effective change and find, again, like going back to the activism aspect of what you can do to help the world in your own specific way. You got to know your own specific way first, what you do, what your skills are, what your contributions are. And I think the group has already alluded to that extensively. So yeah, I think one of our big things is change does come from the individual level, laddering up to the grassroots, and really starting from, and then, yeah, from community, because that's where you see it more often than not. But yeah, and I think what you mentioned about protecting your past and present family, I think that's a mindset we can all agree with, especially kind of from that traditional stereotypical Asian lens of community. So I think that's as part of our Asian identity, I'm sure that that's definitely something that can't really be disentangled. And yeah, I think you mentioned your like Saudi Arabian birth, and I know that that's also, I believe, considered part of the Asian continent, if subcontinent of the Middle East. But yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting aspect as far as, again, the concept of the, so it ties to that question of the Asian monolith, and how do the aspects of that home and the rest of your homes, how does that kind of play in terms of what you can do, where you can, I mean, also along the lines with the Philippines, and everyone faces their own specific challenges. I mean, Saudi Arabia, just by my very limited knowledge, but well, so that's, yeah, I think there's definitely some challenges there that we face across all different aspects of where we are and how we can help address those things. So, but yeah, no, Yvonne, great, thank you so much. And Linda.
I'm just loving the richness of lived experiences in this space. So in terms of my own journey, and I don't know, I just feel so humbled to be with people who came into this world loving and caring, because that wasn't my experience. I was just in such pain. And it took me a lifetime, or half a lifetime, I suppose, if I get to live to a ripe old age, to just unpack my own personal pain. My family are Vietnamese boat people. I was 2 years old when we made that journey. And there was trauma along the way. We lived in a refugee camp in Malaysia. My little sister was born in that refugee camp. So my mother was pregnant during that whole journey. And then we were sponsored out to Australia under a pilot rural resettlement scheme. And we landed in central New South Wales, so the middle of nowhere, in 1979. And some really well-meaning people helped us to settle into life in a new country. And yet there are aspects of this that I'm still mourning, because assimilation became a survival strategy. To be able to acknowledge that, yes, really well-meaning people told my parents to give my sister and I different names because it would make our lives easier in a new country. And it's only a couple of years ago that I began to mourn that loss. And the depth of what that actually means, not just for myself, but also for my parents. We grew up in a big city after we moved away from this little town, and it was a search for a future. It was a search for community. And as a child, I knew my parents loved us because they were never there. They were always working. And my mother worked morning shift at the factory and my father worked afternoon shift at the factory. And so I didn't really get to hear much of my own language. Because when my parents were at home, they were so tired that they didn't really speak to us, and they were never at home at the same time. So I never got to hear them speaking to each other. And so I always grew up with this sense of not really feeling like I quite belonged or fit in anywhere. And it was only as an adult that I was able to unpack that all the adult Vietnamese that I knew were all traumatized, but I didn't know that back then. And so what trauma does, what the decontextualization of time does, is I then conflate trauma with personality, and I conflate family traits with culture. And I became a sitting duck for internalized whiteness, philosophically, psychologically, as well as structurally. And so here I am as a young adult in the world, and I made it through the juvenile justice system. I managed to go to finish high school. I get 2 undergraduate degrees, one in Asian languages and one in international trade. I actually take a class in modern Vietnamese history because I didn't have an origin story, because trauma is unspeakable. And so I couldn't get an origin story from my parents about who I am and who we are and where we've come from, because every time I'd ask them, they'd just go silent. And so I had to go to in colonized settings to find out more about my people. And so I stumble and bumble along the way in life. I'm experiencing codependency, addiction to substances and behaviors. I'm finding my way and fumbling my way, but living on the fringes of society. I stumble across Alaska, and somehow finding Alaska and discovering Alaska was just the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was the third space. In Australia, I never felt quite Vietnamese enough, and I never felt quite Australian enough, and this pain that I had inside of me, and I see this in activist circles. I started weaponizing my pain. I was weaponizing my pain, and it was unleashing itself out against my family, against the people closest to me, and basically against anyone and everyone. And this is what I see over and over again, not just in activist circles, in people recovering from addiction, people recovering from family of origin dysfunction, where I weaponize my pain against someone else, or I weaponize someone else's pain against other people, right? The oppression Olympics. And I needed to I needed to work through my truncated traumatic grief. that work of the wounded healer. And Alaska allowed me that place to do that because of the spaciousness of the land and the spaciousness of community and the spaciousness of a third space where I could actually rediscover and reclaim my Vietnameseness and rediscover and reclaim my Australianness and have them both be able to coexist simultaneously. And whenever I'm away from Alaska, I actually experience how Alaskan I am. I find it soothing, the sound of chainsaws, because we buck our own firewood. And I know it's not the same for other people. Yeah. And here I make moose pho and crispy skinned salmon and steamed halibut with light soy sauce and ginger and green onion and wild duck rice paper rolls and caribou egg rolls. And I grow gai san and gao tom, gao mu, the food of my ancestors here, because I can't buy it here. I don't have these things in easy access. And I had to think to myself, like, there's a missingness. And in the missingness was the reclamation, the power of a third space. And along the way, in this space of reclamation, I got to do my own trauma work, and with trauma comes grief. Yeah, and with grief comes reclamation. And with reclamation came my joyful life, right? This unfettered joy and excitement and enthusiasm for life, which I'd never had before. And the person that I was in the past would have met happy people and gone, screw that. Like, that's not for me. That's like for you happy people. Right? And I would be on this effort to get as far away from them as possible because it was just too much for me. I didn't get it. You weren't my people. Yeah. And so I just want to name that because I also get that we live and breathe alongside people in our own communities whose unresolved, unmetabolized trauma and grief causes for them to have layers and shells of self-protection. And it's okay, right? It's okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. As a result of my own healing journey, I then started teaching meditation and yoga in addiction recovery and in trauma recovery. And then that led to a graduate degree in mental health in my late 30s. Yeah. So for all of the black sheep out there who are still stumbling and bumbling and fumbling your way through the world and feeling the pressure of, I need to do something with my life. Yeah, my life has to have meaning and purpose. I just invite some spaciousness around that. Yeah. And now I'm 44. I finished my graduate degree when I was 41. And I somehow became catapulted into this world of feeling like I've betrayed my hippie redneck roots. Yeah. Because when the pandemic went down, we had $300 in the bank. And I was excited to have all my time back. Yeah. And having a woodshed full of firewood and two chest freezers full of caribou and moose and salmon and frozen vegetables and fermented and pickled food in the larder, right? That to me was currency. Yeah. And it didn't work out that way, right? As in, life beckoned me forth and called me into service, and I'm still grappling. Right? I'm still grappling with this sense that I've betrayed my hippie redneck, roots where I've recovered the wellspring of life force energy. And how do I speak into the world and be in the world in such a way that doesn't disenfranchise individuals for whom, we're all seeking and searching for meaning and purpose and identity in the ways that are available and accessible for us. Yeah. Because I also acknowledge the privilege, the sheer dumb luck that has got me to this subsistence lifestyle. Yeah. As well as the healing modalities and the people who've come along the way in my life at the right time that allowed me to do the deep work of grief. Yeah. I truly believe that we can't do trauma without doing grief. We can't do the work of activism without the work of doing grief. And this is the reason why. Yeah. In Buddhism, we say that life is inherently impermanent, that impermanence is an inherent part of life. And therefore, this then gives rise to the practice of non-attachment. But non-attachment doesn't mean detachment and disengagement. Yeah, it means non-attachment to the fact that I will suffer as a result of living and breathing and enjoying and celebrating the inherent impermanent nature of all things in life. And therefore, our life's task is to learn how to grieve. And when you have been raised in a dysfunctional family, embedded within a dysfunctional culture and society, we're not raised with a container that says, I'm so sorry you've lost a shoe. Because my parents would say, we're not getting bombs dropped on us. Yeah. I'm so sorry that you broke up with someone. It's okay, there's plenty more fish in the ocean. Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry that you didn't get the coffee that you wanted, that they mucked up your order. Go buy yourself another one. Yeah. Amnesia and anesthesia is so readily available. And so this work of activism can butt up against so many of our unmetabolized, unprocessed stuff that is so layered. Yeah. And I share with you my story because I believe that knowledge creates awareness, however, stories change behavior. And grief can be replenishing because we get reconnected to the vitality of the life force energy that flows through all of us.
Amazing, Linda. Yeah, I think a theme that I can at least personally resonate with is grief. Yeah, it's back in grad school, like I took a class on creativity, and one of my main takeaways was this one notion of bereavement theory, where our spark, our Rosalind Detra, our reasons for living come from what has been lost, and it does like inspire that kind of feeling where if you never lost it, you never recognized how much it meant to you. And I think that's an important part of the process as well. Like Ina was talking about, just kind of finding that place where you fit in and finding a value. I think everyone kind of alluded to that. Finding your value, I think, is what you find most important in life is so key. And a lot of it is breaking that down and just kind of finding who you are, what you do, and what you feel you're kind of here to do. And there are lenses across the space. I mean, obviously in the sustainability realm, but there's, self-sustainability in and of itself. But whether your roots, your feeling, your core takes you to some place, I think it's super important to recognize that there's probably a sense of it that is driven by something that kind of got lost along the way, and just really being able to find that and take that journey to really reflect. I think it can redouble and make your efforts so much stronger in kind of pushing towards that way you can help the world a little bit more in your own whatever aspect aspect, whatever, every small change, when you get a groundswell of them, that's how change happens. So yeah, no, I think that's a super important aspect to consider. And I guess in some of the time we have left for the panel, I think I want to do a bit of a synthesis too, just kind of obviously everyone's stories. I mean, fascinated by the different walks of life, backgrounds that got folks to where they are and where they serve. And I guess we'll get more into the activities for sure, but like, what are some of the takeaways folks have upon hearing everyone else's stories about where we go? How can we move towards finding our own actionable ways of working? And yeah, if anybody on the panel has any points of view on this, any resonances from other folks' stories, would love to hear those POVs. Yeah, open the floor a little bit for some free discussion.
Sure, I can go if you'd like, Christian.
Yeah, by all means.
Yeah, no, so many great stories. And one thing I noticed is that you echoed, especially, and Linda was echoing in grief, and everyone, kind of talked about how things in their own lives or times when people were worrying about how it would affect their Asian family back home or in other areas. And I think that's really powerful, because one of the things with climate change, when you look at its kind of effect, and I guess like tying it to the theme of the panel, like people's mental health, is that it can seem like such this colossal issue, which it is, but that kind of has like two effects. I find it has, number one, it has the effect of it's so big where you kind of depersonalize away from it, and it's just like, let's compartmentalize. And the other half of, so it's like you really don't want to think of it at all. And the other half of that is it's so big, you kind of just get this sense of like despair, right? And I think what was really interesting is not what everyone's kind of talking about, their own personal experience or worrying about things that I've lost or things that could be lost, is it's like this, it's a good way, better way of viewing it than those two other kind of things I mentioned, because when you focus on kind of like that personal element, on like, I felt this before, I don't want others to feel it, I don't want this to affect like other people, like I think it's kind of that step that allows you to like make your own action, and then as the way you just solve issues like this is like collectively, right? And I think that's kind of what everyone echoed. I think that's a great way to talk about this, so we could avoid again those two other ways to look at climate, which frankly aren't very helpful to solving the problem or ourselves, which is decompartmentalizing it, acting like, oh, it's not going to happen in my lifetime, or just not even thinking about it at all. Or number two, just it's okay to feel like despair, and it's okay to feel those negative emotions, but not feeling those emotions too much and letting them overpower you from, because, and and to kind of end on that, and I feel like that's the great thing about when you do your action, is because now it helps give you some agency. Again, we know we need collective action in a lot, but when you feel like you can affect other people and help them with dealing with this issue and society, I feel like that gives you some hope and helping to deal with all that grief or potential fear of loss.
I appreciate what you uplift there, Warren, and I would echo between what Linda had shared as well, and I mean, I think with all of us, there's a pattern, right? Like, collectively, especially in the cultures that we find ourselves in, which might not necessarily be the ones that we've had ancestry with. There's a pattern. Like, one of the issues, as far as, let's say, speaking or just like formally taking action on things like slavery or genocides against the indigenous people in the US, right? There's almost a collective shame and denial that goes there. And I use shame because I think, one, because I've been working through toxic shame, and that's my own endeavor as well. But shame basically it exists as a form. It happens when we struggle to see our whole selves in a healthy way. And when I say health, I think our capacity to take care of ourselves, and maybe to an extent others. And if I want to expand it further, collective health, I would say, is a form of wealth. And if we're thinking in an environmental frame, when Linda mentioned, having caribou or having, connection with land and being able to take care of oneself, that there is something to be thought of in terms of like there's kind of an abundance or some capacity to take care of yourself, but also, you're in a place where that's possible and that it can be trusted, right? And another thought was, when it comes to identity, one of the things that I feel really, at least it's a useful or interesting paradigm or lens that we can look at culture through, especially for some of the patterns in a lot of Asian diasporas, is kind of like, at least in East Asian, Confucian influenced East and Southeast Asian, is the often we hear things like harmony, right? Like, and there's kind of an implicit try not to stir the pot too much. It's used disingenuously often, almost like in a gaslighting kind of way. And especially when it comes to growing. So in my case, Southeast Michigan, I was the diversity in the community that I grew up in most of the time. One of the few Asian people, or East Asian at least, or Southeast Asian. And, and this was in place where, like, the year before I was born, they tried banning books on biology or geology, as well as world religions, including Buddhism, because it might persuade people that, Christianity might not exist or something like that. And evolution, it's not fair to Christianity. And there were cross burnings, as in KKK, a couple streets up, and later on in college, after college, I'm sorry, like 2 years ago, a friend told me there were other towns that were doing that too. So I thought it was just a phenomenon that my mom, was afraid of, but it didn't fully register when I was growing up that why she was afraid when she heard noises at night and stuff like that, until later on, I hear like there are death threats and things like that. So when I talk about like, I've already gone on like a way to a tangent, but when can someone remind me what I was talking about? Maybe like rewind 20 seconds. What? I lost everyone apparently. I don't know. Let's see.
I think you were talking about collective shame and how it impacts our ability to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, and characterizing us as cultures, right? Or at least as and I'm going to say at least as communities, because here on this call, we've convened and there's an opportunity to cultivate some shared experience and values, and but like a lot of our tendencies, if you really think about it, some of them were from a place of hardship, right? Or many of them, and that's important to be able to embrace, and that's where that nexus of grief to gratitude, I think, is also really powerful, which Linda is exploring, because on one hand, there's something to be said about also how we survive, right? That there's an opportunity to embrace the challenges that we've experienced. So some sort of imperial control dynamics or whatever else, and trying to preserve society, but also recognizing that when you really look at and again, this is kind of going back to some Buddhist thought, that it doesn't necessarily like detach. I think zero-sum thinking is like a hallmark of whiteness, right? Like so it's often, and I can't really speak from the Asian, like old school Buddhist point of view, but like often when people think about meditation or enlightenment and things like that, they think, oh, I'm just going to be an ascended being as soon as I start meditating. But no, most people, when you hear someone talk about I tried meditating, right, and they struggled, and sometimes it also brings up this huge upwelling of anger or conflict. And the characterization for me about thinking about peace is that no, you're prioritizing space for maybe in Aikido, it's a martial art. I is in harmony, ki, energy, and Do, like way of discovery. Like there's a way to to at least embrace conflict and ideally transform it into a more favorable outcome, which is not necessarily avoiding it. It's still being present with it, like immensely so, if you look at it from that martial arts point of view. But you know, that's something that I think is pretty special, I guess, in terms of how we have opportunities to examine the way that we exist in the communities that we're in, and also our own dispositions. You know, I kind of spoke around a lot of things, and honestly, it was because I didn't, earlier in the session, I didn't really know how to gauge how safe I felt, and also like what, you know, what level of story and depth I could share. But I think for a lot of us that, yeah, I guess when it comes to looking at what dynamics come in as far as, you know, why were we afraid to speak certain languages or not taught them? In my case, that was definitely, you know, the challenge. And you know, why was it so difficult to connect with other Asian people? And, you know, realizing that, oh, there is internalized trauma or whiteness, you know, in particular, things like that. You know, it goes back to what kind of care does this need? And from this lens, even just speaking to this Asian label, that notion of collective liberation or co-liberation, I think is a really uplifting or great direction to go. I could talk for a really long time, but I realize, you know, there are limits. So I want to make sure there's space for others on the panel or outside as well. But that's what I want to say. Thanks to all the panelists so far. I'm really glad you're bringing yourselves here, and also everyone in the, I don't know, you're going to be participants soon. So just everyone else here on the Zoom. Thanks. You know, I got some good energy at the pregame when people trickling in.
And I'm going to riff off of some of the things that you shared. And I love how you bring that cultural piece into it, like harmony and conflict avoidance, because I feel that that's one of the cultural traits that can cause for many of us to not step into conversations and actions around co-liberation. And I'd like to offer into that space the possibility of creative tension. So rather than thinking, yeah, because this is why I never got involved with activist groups, like when I saw them emerging in my teenage years and my 20s, it was like, it just felt so confrontational and angry. And maybe it was, right? And maybe it wasn't, I don't know. However, for me now, how I carry myself can be the spaciousness within which creative tension can arise. And I like to use those words, creative tension, because there are those parts of me that value harmony, but it's really conflict avoidance. Yeah. And reinforcing the systems and structures of power and oppression and voicelessness or power over. And so I'm loving that we're all here and having conversations that may spark some creative tension within each of us as individuals, possibly, that may perhaps highlight the creative tensions in our communities, whether it's inner circle or outer circle, and that can cause us to become curious about how to develop those skills that will allow us to co-liberate. Knowing that we're going to step on each other's shame triggers, right? Like this is hard work we're doing. And I think it's actually spiritual bypass if we go directly into, come on, let's get in action.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that also, as far as that sense of, like, again, shame is like you're not being able to see your whole self, right? And also, you know, as a community or in terms of identity, part of your whole self is the community that you're connected to, or maybe unable to connect with at that time because of that skewed condition. But again, it speaks to, you know, it's the negative space for gratitude, right? And it is kind of, you know, grief in itself is too, right? It's a form of appreciation over loss, in at least in the way that I've experienced or think about it. And when it comes to like I feel like the more rooted, so for example, like I remember hearing the character for tragedy in Japanese, what is it, kanji? I'm not sure which one. There's a bunch of different katakana or kanji, which the Honey's Chinese character also, it basically is two things. One is separation on top, and on the bottom it looks like a heart, which can be emblematic for, you know, heart, obviously, emotion or spirit, you know, and so that actually it's a spatial concept, right? Like you can think like, oh, actually, you know, maybe the solution to tragedy is bringing something back together, right? And when it comes to, like, for me, you know, being like much like you, I think I was working through a lot of cultural self-hate, you know, internalized whiteness type stuff as well, and all the way to like 2015-ish, where I realized, oh man, I was in an orchestra, and I felt really like, so in my music background, I would play a lot. I've played in a lot of rock bands and stuff, and also, you know, with some hip hop and funk ensembles. And so that was kind of like a hallmark almost. Like you know, I don't know how to explain otherwise, but like it was unusual for an Asian person to be, you know, playing with groups like this, but also, at least in the U.S., right, at the time, and you know, and I was playing on a violin, you know, but then I was in this orchestra also. And I realized, well, there are a lot of Asian people here. And I just realized that my body felt tense and uncomfortable about that. And I realized it's because, oh, I feel like it could be because I would be targeted as you know, the stereotypical Asian person playing a violin kind of a thing. But everybody in there, you know, like that's hate is an unreasonably sustained hostility. And that's exactly what it was that I kept on me. But again, like when we clock back and look at what gives you kind of right to exist, you know, and you don't really need to reason with hate, right? Like it's the people fundamentally, you can just accept yourself. And that's one of the things that in a lot of Buddhist precepts or teachings, it is just like, you know, like enlightenment or whatever else. It is just like, you just accept yourself, but you don't have to find a way. It's just be that, you know, just be actually, right? Sometimes that sounds really hippie-ish, and it's a lot harder, you know, like I feel like a good parallel would be you know, that cave scene in Return of the Jedi, right, where Luke has to go in and he wants to bring a lightsaber, but Yoda's like, hey, you're not even going to need that. You gotta bear witness, right? And when he confronts this horrible vision, it turns out it's like there's himself looking at himself, you know, in the thing. So that's kind of an extended metaphor for kind of what can happen in meditation or in other endeavors in terms of trying to work through and, you know, do all that stuff. But yeah, I got really excited. Thanks for, I'm gonna give space again.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome summative view of this, like across the dimensions of despair, shame, something we all have. It's very Asian. Everyone as a human has it, but it's a very Asian aspect, as we've learned from a number of different sessions we've had. But yeah, to get to that next step, not next step of action, I mean, is the intermediary and most important of that self-reflection and that introspection, be it through meditation or other forms of just reflection. And I think that's probably a good segue into some of the activities we'll be doing in order to kind of rethink and reframe and just explore our POVs on things. So I guess with that in mind, before we jump in, we usually like having a mindfulness exercise, a meditation. So I think, again, pretty appropriate, especially what we've considered. And we always have Linda lead us in a always wonderful, restorative, relaxing, but hopefully this time around too intentful experience of just being able to kind of reflect on what we've talked about and think about those senses of values and those senses of shame, trauma, despair, what has been difficult in the past, and how you can kind of forge that into your form of action. So I'll hand it off to Linda to walk us through and guide us through some of those sentiments.
Yes, thank you, Christian. Okay, you are invited to stand up if that feels accessible, available, and appropriate for you in this moment. And so what I'm going to guide you through is a somatic mindfulness piece, because connecting to the collective is where we can get some source energy for the journey forth. Yeah, it's all invitational. Yeah, so if you like, you can start with hands at the torso. Yeah, and to gently bend at the knees. And if you like, you can spread one arm out at a time and bring it back in. Yeah. Or maybe perhaps you'd like to experiment with extending both arms out. Mm-hmm. And this space here is the space of community. So as you invite your arms open and bring your arms back in, I invite you to visualize your communities of activists, your communities of friends and neighbors, people who you live alongside and work alongside and love alongside. Perhaps people you've met in person, perhaps not. Yeah. If you like, I invite you to pause with arms out wide, and if we're together in community, we'd be standing in circle with a hand on someone's shoulders. And I invite you to turn your head from side to side and to imagine yourself taking in the view of these people who've got your back. The people whose backs you've got, which then allows us to step forward and in and allows us to step back and out, so that we don't feel like we're engaging in go it alone. Because if we want to go fast, we go alone, but if we want to go far, we travel together. And then gathering the energy of this community, I invite you to bring it into heart center. And to breathe this in, to breathe in that there are people who've got your back and you can carry this energy with you wherever you go. And then if you like, one more time, you can choose to give of your energy into the collective community and then receiving the energy of the community back into heart center. This time, I invite you to explore the vertical domain, to reach down towards the earth, mud, lava, dirt, grass, earthworms. And then from here to reach up toward the sky, moon and stars and air and northern lights and ether and clouds and rain and rainbow. And then to reach back down toward the earth, moving through field and stream, mountain and lakes, deserts and glaciers, and deep, deep oceans. Perhaps bending your knees, perhaps touching the earth with your hands. And I invite you to move between heaven and earth and to notice what arises for you as you make contact with the interconnected web of nature, of earth. And then if you like, gathering the energy of nature and bringing it into heart center. I am the earth experiencing herself as human. And then the last plane of existence, forward and back. So if you like, reach one arm forward and the other arm back. And coming in through center, reaching the other arm forward and the other arm back. And play with this. The past and the future. And here I am in this moment. And if you like, as you reach, I invite you to look back over the arm that's out back and to acknowledge the ancestors from which you've come, whether it's bloodline or teachers or teachings, professional ancestors, activist ancestors, spiritual ancestors, the teachers of your teachers and the communities of your teachers. And then coming back through center. Letting go as you switch sides of that which you do not wish to inherit. Yeah. And claiming that which you do choose to inherit, for we stand on the shoulders of giants and looking forward, those who have yet to come. And that which I choose to give. To come back through center. To come back into heart center. The ground beneath my feet, this present moment in time. Claiming my inheritance, letting go of that which I choose for now not to inherit. And breathing into this precious moment in collective and community. As you breathe, I want to acknowledge that practice is from the Generative Somatics Institute. And it is a combination of practices from Aikido, Ayurveda, and yoga. Yeah. Make some sounds. Yeah. Take up some space. Wiggle your body. And I'm going to hand back over to Christian.
Yeah, that was definitely some looseness and needed and some reflection. So I think that was, yeah, that was fantastic just to kind of get that feel and that reflection. So, and I think hopefully that kind of cues us up to jump into our exercises. So share my screen real quick. And what we usually do in a lot of these kind of events is some kind of breakout activities, small group kind of sessions where, and in this case for this session, we'll be going through some exercises that the panelists are intimately familiar with. So we'll share kind of like what offerings are available, and then folks will be able to choose which room is of interest to them. Again, so the rules for the breakout, you select a room and I'll show the list shortly. We can talk through it. But yeah, if you room switch, perfectly fine. If you'd like to see another topic, just get a holistic sense of everything. Just be respectful of what the conversation's going on, jump in when things feel right. And yeah. So with that in mind, here's kind of like our breakdown where folks will be. So let me change this up a little bit. So just so where it's kind of last been arranged. And I don't know if Yvonne is still on the call. I know there are two deeps right now with the weird kind of structure of this, so she might be the other deep.
I believe she's dropped right now. And she had a last minute move thing and the Wi-Fi people came in early and she just, it happens.
No,
But she holds, I believe, weekly live journaling sessions. I'm going to link her next event in the chat. It's at 7:30 a.m. on Wednesday PST, so like 10:30 EST time. And like, feel free to join. I know I'm going to be there, so hopefully I see you guys there too.
Okay, great. In that case, so I have the rooms lined up here. So let me put them in bold. So for those, so yeah, feel free to give a read through of what the activities are. And when I open the, this might end up being 2. Let me just fiddle around with this a bit. Okay. Let's see, did that work? Okay, no, it's still the same. Okay. So yeah, I think we have, so these are the room numbers. So I'll open up the breakout. So we have the panelists already assigned and some of the facilitators allocated. So we can have folks, so I'll open up the rooms now, actually, and then again, here's the list. And yeah, you should be able to choose which one you'd like to jump in to. And I think for time reference, so we're at the 40, so we're probably going to have to do a bit of a shortened one, unfortunately, but I think we definitely wanted some of that convo to be able to go on. But we'll probably look to regroup around the 55 on the hour, wherever you're located, just to do like a small debrief, just to kind of reflect on what folks had went through. And yeah, we'll just look to close out and break for the session.
Christian, are you sharing something on your screen? Because right now we just see mindfulness meditation.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, it did go from, all right, let me try this again. It might be just sharing the one slide, but it might have frozen. So let me try this again and see if this goes this time. How about now? Breakout sessions? Cool. All right. So yeah. So Linda's group will remain in the lobby, so no need to go to a breakout. Ian, you're in room 1. So doing diaspora, disconnection, trauma, synthesis, co-liberation. Linda's gratitude, grief, reclamation, decolonized approach to social justice, and Warren, collective organizing, institutional mapping. So yeah, again, whatever appeals to your interests, your background, your form of activism, activating, feel free to just jump in. And if you want to jump around, by all means. So I will open up the rooms now. Hopefully folks will be getting their invites.
I'll say that for anyone that wants to just join me, and if the topic isn't quite a thing, I'm open to more open conversation or so too. So if anyone feels like a just catch-all category, that's possible. We'll check in with everyone else in the group. See you in room 1.
Cool. Okay. See everyone in a bit. Sure. I'm looking at just like the folks who've carried over. I'm not sure if Christina and Trier made it to their rooms, but oh, Christina, if you want to be in this room, that's totally cool too. But I just assigned you a room. So
yeah, I just wanted to remain in this room.
yeah, no, totally cool. So yeah, I think we're covered there, so it's all good. Okay, great. So yeah, I think I'll stop sharing. And yeah, no, thanks everyone for sticking around for this one. And we can, yeah, why don't we dive in again? Yeah, like feel free to go off video, go on mic. But again, these are all events where super chill and don't want to pressure anyone. Again, with all of the Zoom fatigue, it's always good to just be able to listen sometimes. But yeah, with that, I will hand it off to Linda.
That would require me unmuting myself. What a gift to be here in community with you, Christina and Maggie and Lisa. Would it be okay to hear a little bit from each of you? What have been your takeaways thus far? And what is it that's knocking at your soul's door? What's salient for you that we can speak into together?
From reflecting on the session, a lot of it for me has been kind of finding my place. And I think it was going into this session, like, and very aligned with sustainability movements, and et cetera. But I think kind of finding how that aligns with me and my values. I wouldn't say it's like first and foremost in my values, but I think being able to find my connection is super important. I think one of the things that has deeply affected me in the past is, like, somebody mentioned that the effect of having so many emails racked up into your account because it takes up so much server space and energy consumption. And I've, like, since then have just been completely restricting all of my, like, unnecessary emails. And but yeah, like, it definitely, I think one aspect of it is again, a bit of the more on the micro level, but that guilt and shame of, like, oh man, I am not doing, I do what I can to help out, but if there's more I can do, I think that's been one of the things. But just kind of, again, that introspection is a big part in finding my forms of being able to activate help, yeah, and address what I've been through to get to there.
I see some nodding from you, Christina. Go for it. Riff.
Yeah, I think I just really appreciated everyone's stories a lot, and especially yours, Linda. I think that and also the mindfulness activity we just did, I thought that was a really powerful activity. So I guess a little bit about myself first. I was born in China and moved to the US when I was about 8 years old. And I think that it's really interesting to hear about everyone's like experiences growing up like as part of the Asian diaspora, and the ways in which like you can become alienated from your own culture, and how that that process of grieving that loss is such an important part of healing and of activism. Let's see. I think for me, I feel like fairly connected to my culture. I think because having grown up there until elementary school, but I definitely also feel a sense of alienation when I go back, and feeling like I have just changed so much to the point where people, like, I see things differently than other people, and people see me differently. Yeah, and I think that like the also like connecting to your roots, and like I think what Ian said about like seeing, no, it wasn't Ian, I forgot who said it about like seeing, I think it was Yvonne who said about like looking at the Philippines and how there's like pollution and trash, and like connecting to your own community was such an important part for her to realize why she was doing the things that she was doing. I think that was also a huge factor of me being interested in being part of environmental movements like fossil fuel divestment movement when I was in college, was just really seeing the impact of air pollution on my family's health in China. Yeah, and then I also just want to really appreciate the point that was brought up about conflict avoidance and harmony, because I think that's one thing that I'm working on myself in terms of seeing like always feeling like I sometimes don't have the right words to speak up, or not wanting conflict unless I have a really thought out plan going into it. And like having that space of like being comfortable with like the rawness of conflict is something that is like more difficult for me. So I think that was I really appreciated that point, and I think that is really productive in activist spaces, and not something that is often engaged in, because I think especially in like the fossil fuel divestment movement, which I was a part of in college, I see a lot of like rhetoric about like this is the like there's like the story of self, the story of us, the story of now, and how like we need to have this collective narrative, and sometimes the story of self, even though like we highlight it, we try to like match it into this collective narrative, and there is actually a lot of tension within the collective narrative that is not often acknowledged. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing, Christina, that really resonated with me was kind of that notion of that conflict avoidance. From what I've learned in a lot of our sessions, very Asian as well. Don't want to rock the boat. You don't talk back. You kind of prep and make sure you're saying the right things instead of just jumping right in, which I feel like is a very Western trait. And there is definitely that aspect of considering where we fall in that and how we make our actions and how we kind of work through that. So that is definitely a huge consideration for our on the Asian perspective of things. But yeah.
Let's hear from Maggie if you would like to share.
I feel like I will like talk like a lot and like take up so much space because yeah, there's just like so many things happening in my head right now. So I joined a little bit late because Deep was like saying like, hey, you should like check this out, that's happening right now, you'd probably like it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like right up my alley because I was actually one of those kids that you were talking about that like cared from the beginning. I got into environmentalism when I was like 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old in grade 1 because we learned about like deforestation in the Amazon and soil erosion, all of these issues. And I was so angry about that. Like just this little kid who is like totally indignant about how dare people be so arrogant to like just be destroying such like beautiful life and in the process be destroying ourselves. And I kind of continued on with it until university, where I recently graduated and I wrote my thesis on the environmentalisms of BIPOC because I'd noticed that the environmental movement tended to be very white and have a lot of white perspectives, and that we were actually underrepresented in the field. And a lot of what, like you were saying, what the other speakers were saying, and what you were saying, Christina, even really kind of reminded me of my research because one like a major finding I found was that a lot of BIPOC noticed or felt very close to like environmental justice issues because they often had closer ties to like people overseas who are being personally affected by these kinds of things. And that like whole bit about like yeah, feeling alienated from your culture. And like I write a lot of poetry about being Asian Canadian, and that I talk about like the perpetual foreigner and being in the strange in between, and how you know, the last time I was in China, so I was born there, but we immigrated to Canada when I was 2. I noticed a lot of like feelings of being like afraid of almost like being made as a foreigner, and it was really interesting because I actually like seem to pass very well, and like we were at the store and like trying to buying a new cell phone, and the people assumed that I was a student who had like grown up there and was going overseas for like university, because that's become so much more common now. And that's just a really interesting experience. And I mean, what you talked about with like Alaska and having like a third space where you're not in Asia feeling like you're too Western, and then you're not in the West feeling like you're too Asian. Like I had kind of a similar experience when I went to Peru in 2019 for my co-op. And it was like amazingly healing to to not be in Asia and for the first time in my life being less strange than the white girl. So like, yeah, I just like really, really, really loved like everything you said. And I wrote a book that's all about it's fiction, but it's like really, it deals so much with like grief and healing from that. And I just feel very, very inspired.
What's your book?
It's a YA fantasy, and it's kind of dystopian fantasy, which is not really a genre right now, but I was like 14 when I came up with the idea, and I didn't care about genre or know too much about genre. And it's just, it follows one character who's like lost her memory and trying to find and reclaim her agency and herself with that. Another character who knew her and loved her very much and has now been forgotten, and how he is dealing with that grief of losing her and not being remembered and all of that. And then a third character who hates himself basically and is trying to learn how to not see himself as a monster. So yeah.
Do you have the title of the book? Is it out?
No, so I'm querying to try to get an agent to try to get it out. Yeah, but it's called An Iridescent Blue, so hopefully you'll get to see it someday.
Yeah, no. I actually have been something I've been working on too for like the past 6 years or so. Also dystopian, well, not dystopian, just no, dystopian fantasy, science fantasy. So there are dozens of us out there who like feel, and I feel like a big part of it, for me, it's an internal exploration, kind of similar ways. Like it has 4 characters and they're each, again, I guess like something I discovered too, finding their own ways of dealing with death and grief. So I mean, it's one of those things, like strangely enough, I had there's one character who, I guess like 2 aspects of it. It's like, when you're going to die, and when you die, you're forgotten. So kind of like that question of what is purpose of life. And strangely enough, I had a young girl who was a character and like pass away really young. And like, and actually like this, like 2 months ago, my niece passed away from brain cancer. So she was 4, so it was definitely very hard. And for me, it's been a way of kind of like grappling with that grief. And yeah, I think it's writing is a form of activism in and of itself. And again, like for me, it's like that self-reflection. And strangely enough, there's also themes of like environmentalism in it, and like views on like my background is in science and technology and society. So just kind of like the impacts of different things. So just each region has like, one is very like naturalistic, spiritual, tied to the earth, and like another was very tech oriented and completely destroyed. And one is more like a religious kind of very austere group. So yeah, I think the avenue of writing, at least for me, has been very reflective, which I think, especially like moving through grief and moving through bereavement. So yeah, no, definitely can resonate.
Yeah. And I mean, my book is so like secretly like anti-capitalist and anti-colonialist and very environmental, and talks about like connecting with the word and collectivist too. So yeah, that's awesome.
Reflections of self and like where your values lie, it's super important.
Yeah, and also it's really funny that you mentioned how writing like helped you through grief, because for me, I actually had a similar experience with, so with this book, I'd been working on it for years and years and years and years. And sorry not to be taking up so much space, but with what I mentioned earlier with Peru, yes, it was healing to be not in Asia and less strange than the white girl, but that white girl still really wrought havoc on me. And I was like all alone and stuck with her, and she just wouldn't stop with the microaggressions and didn't recognize that it was microaggressions. And by the end of it, I felt like I was completely broken down in that I didn't know who I was anymore and I didn't recognize who I was anymore. So it was very healing to be writing this book and to be working with this character who didn't remember who she was, because it was like that was my experience of being completely broken down and then having to like try to figure out a way to find my agency again, find who I am again. And it's just so strange how that happens.
In service of the time boundary, which is coming up, I'm curious whether Lisa would like to share your voice into this community.
Hi everyone. Sure. Yeah, I've just been, I really like the energy of this Zoom meeting. I just saw this on Facebook and I thought I'd check it out. I wasn't expecting, I wasn't expecting so much like relatability. I've been going through a lot. I'm originally from Burma, or Myanmar, as this is called now. So, my parents came to this country, and I'm sure you guys heard about, all the stuff that's been ongoing recently. And COVID was like wreaking havoc there. I lost my grandparents to COVID there, and majority of my family got COVID there. And I'm supposed to I'm in America, and a part of me is like I'm going through a lot health-wise, so it's very confusing for me because how do I say this, like I started having very severe like neurological problems like April of this year, and it's been devastating. I am not taking any classes this semester because I just couldn't handle it, and this summer was horrible. Like if it wasn't for my husband, I'd probably be dead. So it's so confusing because sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I stayed in Burma or in Asia. But at the same time, it's like there's a lot of turmoil there. And my life, before I started having these health issues, I had deal with depression for a while and OCD. Things improved and my mental health recovered, and and I got married and I was very happy for a while. But society has not been too kind to me, to be honest. I tried to reach out to, like like you were saying before, some of the activist spaces online. I think in the early days, especially with the Asian American issues, it can be very scary and even kind of toxic, like a lot of blaming like Asian women, and I mean, I'm not saying like what I've come across, I haven't felt very welcome, so I'm really glad like things have developed and evolved to this, and just much more accepting and open. Yeah, so I'm going through a lot and I'm really sleep deprived. I was dealing with severe headaches this summer, and my headaches are not disappeared. I have still insomnia, and I had the test done and they said everything is okay, but it's really worrying because um, I'm not able to function the way that I used to, and I don't feel confident about, studies and things like that. Um, it's and I'm doing all that I can. I'm, prescribed antidepressant. I'm taking that. Surprisingly, it's not helping me with insomnia or um, some of my issues. Um, I have a supportive family, but it's just whatever I'm going through, it's really difficult to cope with.
Thank you for your sharing, Lisa.
No problem.
Yeah, let's just take a breath. And I'd like to offer something into this space. Yeah. Which is resource. Yeah, because resource is primary. Yeah. And trauma is secondary. Trauma disrupts, disconnects, disorients us. Cultural identity is part of our resource. So I'm going to put some words into the chat box and I'm going to teach you the words, and we can do call and response initially. Yeah, so it goes like this. I did not come here alone. I carry my people in my bones. I did not come here alone. If you listen, you can hear them in my soul. I'll sing a line, you sing a line. I did not come here alone. Your turn. I did not come here alone. I carry my people in my bones. I carry my people in my bones. I did not come here alone. I did not come here alone. If you listen, you can hear them in my soul. If you listen, you can hear them in my soul. All together. I did not come here alone. I carry my people in my bones. I did not come here alone. If you listen, you can hear them in my soul. Yeah. To bring sustainability into our lives means conscious, intentional connection to resources. Yeah. Find your people. They're in your bones. Yeah. Song, story, movement, and silence is ancient technology that weaves its way through all cultures. And what we have as a strength in the Asian American community is this connection to cultural, ancestral, environmental aspects of identity that we can leverage upon to create culture. And that is what sustains us. Yeah. And we have to find ways in which to nourish ourselves and each other, because I promise you, this won't be over in my lifetime. And it won't be over in my kid's lifetime or anyone else's kids' lifetimes. Whether you're talking about racism or as in systemic, institutional, structural racism, yeah? Or the issues around inequitable distribution of wealth and resources, or issues around the environment. We have to sustain ourselves, otherwise we burn out.
It ties very much strongly to like 3 years ago now. I was definitely at my lowest level. Trigger warning, like went through multiple suicide attempts. At a better place now, medicated, but I know without family support, I wouldn't be here as well. And a big part of it too is, again, finding that value. As I was going through my restorative therapy, I took dialectic behavioral therapy course with a group session. And one of the big tenets was finding what matters to you. And I mean, for me, like it's real and really crystallizing, solidifying that. And for me, it's community. That's why I do this volunteer work and be able to just give back as much as possible, because it gives you something beyond yourself when you feel lost. It's something to grasp onto. And I think, Lisa, if there are things, and again, it's a big part of that introspection, if there's something that really gravitates to you, something that, again, going to that concept of bereavement, something that feels lost to you, if that's something you can hone in on and channel it, it could be that catalyst of finding kind of who you are and where you want to be. So yeah, it's kind of my resonance with what you shared. The other group must be really, oh, there we go, really digging in. Everyone, I was just like, y'all are must have been enjoying a real good time in there, just keeping things going. Great. So yeah, no, just to close out, I know we're over. Oh, I think Ian's still in the room by himself.
Let's hope we bring him back. I think he wasn't sure how to use Zoom. So I think he knew how to kick us out, but he wasn't sure how to kick himself. So if you could help.
Return. Oh wait, I think I could just move him back. Oh, okay, I think he's back.
Thanks. I was lost in space. Twilight Zone for a minute.
Happy to have you return from our digital world. But yeah, no, I think definitely some great combos. I mean, the other group, I think we had to bring you back. If there's Ian in your group, if there's anything you wanted to share out at large, definitely feel free. I think we had some good learnings on this end, and we did a bit of a share out. So if anyone wants to, and everyone in general, if somebody wants to kind of bring up something they felt, feel free to jump in before we close out.
All right. Actually, I want to tap on Giri. Or anyone in my group want to kind of say what the takeaway was, maybe, or some remarks? You can all unmute.
I'm on my phone, so I can't tell if anyone else unmuted, but I'm going to go ahead since you invited me to it. Yeah, that talk, the summary, the nut of it is that in the Americas, or in the space here where we're like trying to be strong. Okay, maybe I'm overthinking it, but like, and Asians end up being becoming like this sidekicks, or for deprioritizing like our relationship to racial traumas, as Susanna offered as a term around our own stuff, that we have to, like, as like good activist Asians, we lend our energy to, you know, Black, Indigenous, working class people's struggles, right? And then we don't know, we end up kind of like putting ourselves aside. So like tapping back into giving ourselves space and grace to have fertile ground for that. Yeah, I'll keep it there. Add on as you need.
Anyone want to add to it? I can. Paula, are you good? Yeah, so I was just gonna say that yeah, a good portion of the conversation was looking at unpacking, you know, state of mental health. Whiteness is an institution, but also what are ways that you can change that, and also prioritizing space to grieve. And the opportunity that we identified is how can we kind of, you know, kind of either reintroduce ceremony or other ways of creative action that prioritizes that aspect of how to develop ourselves in terms of, to co-liberate. It's also to cultivate our own sense of identity and self. And that way we can also make sometimes better connections with the different cultures that we're working in support of or in collective liberation with too. So our kind of call to action, or at least for consideration as we part, maybe not part, as we that we might carry with us would be, is there a way that we can prioritize opportunities for intentional grief, and transformational spaces for that collectively.
Yeah.
And it could be through like your martial arts dojo, or, through dance, or through music, or through anything else, through food, just gather people and have that on a regular basis. I forgot that nugget too. All right, I yield the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that takeaway I feel like really resonated with our group, where we kind of led into, again, that value, what is intrinsically you, and using that to catalyze and move forward and get to that best sense of self that kind of can pull you, especially if you're in a dark place. And it's a hard journey. It's very hard, but it can feel so rewarding when you find bits of those movements. Again, it's a journey, and we'll get to places where we go, and hopefully events like this have been helpful for really doing that kind of reflection. And so yeah, just in the interest of time, I know we're pretty over now, but like to close out again. One of the things we do is just that 3 words exercise again, just to kind of do another check-in to reflect on where you were and where you are now. Hopefully a little less tired, but it's okay if you are. Take a nice long nap afterwards if so. But yeah, no, I think it's we always hope that kind of there's a bit of uplift, and yeah, I think that's for sure something we can share the slides again for the tip and journal codes. Yeah, I'm guessing, Deep, do you have those on the document? Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I dropped the Google Slides for everyone who came to the event today. On the slides, you'll have information of our orgs that collaborated to make this event happen today, and the panelists who led Convo. And at the end of the slides, you'll also see, we're still working on the research component. So like there'll be linked resources and stuff like that by the end of tonight and tomorrow morning, if you need access. And one of the slides has a QR code if you'd like to help tip our panelists today for their labor going forward. And also links to their respective websites. So if you click on their names on the slide with the panelists information, it'll actually take to their websites, LinkedIn, or anything else that they've already shared. So you can learn more about them and keep in touch also.
Allow me to share the screen briefly because I have it up. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I'll just share my desktop. Sorry, you're seeing all of my stuff. Here we go.
It's also just like at Sustainable Asian Trades. Don't worry, it isn't just going to me. It is going to the panelists.
Okay. And then there's also a climate journal that discount code that Yvonne wanted to share. So if you want the physical journal, there's a 10% off, and digital journal is 40% off. And this will be included in the slide deck.
And again, she has an event on Wednesday at 7:30 if anyone wants to come and journal.
And we also kind of brainstormed this idea, but we wanted to do a quick straw poll with folks. Since this was like a good introductory event to kind of looking at the intersections of climate change and mental health, since it's still a underrated conversation, or like less spoken about in the community, we wanted to ask if folks would like to see this type of programming happen again in the future, maybe do like a series of these conversations that focus on different elements as well. If it's a good idea, just give a thumbs up or just mention in the chat.
Deep, did you say you're launching the poll now, or?
So sorry, could you repeat that?
I was just wondering if you're launching the poll right now or if you're just saying it's like somewhere in like the slides. Sorry, I'm like, I kind of heard and I just like,
Oh, no, you're good. I was just asking in general. So if y'all
okay.
think it's a good idea, just say yes, I guess, in the Zoom chat, or just a thumbs up, because we want to see if there's interest to keep this conversation going. Awesome. I'm also going to drop our 3 Facebook groups that helped collaborate to create this event. So if you'd like to see the programming specifically, you'll find it there in future events as well. So that's Sustainable Asian Traits, Subtle Asian Mental Health, and then Subtle Asian Activists. And if you have feedback too on what topics should be spoken about, feel free to contact admins too. We try to make sure that we are putting on programming that reflects the needs of the community as directly as possible. Awesome. I think so. We're at the end of the event. Is there anything else people want to do shout outs for upcoming events? Anything for orgs or local mutual aid or anything else to support?
This is kind of a curiosity, and I've already put it in the chat too, but it'd be nice to have a check-in and see, you know, what people have explored. You know, like we laid a lot of seeds today, and I'd love to hear how some of them have been nourished. You know, if anybody, you know, continues with the Climate Journal project, for example, is there anything enriching that they'd like to celebrate or share in the future? Things of that nature. It'd be basically just some continuity, and you know, for any joint next steps. And then of course, I want to say thank you to all of the folks who really put in the work to organize, wrangle all the cats, including me. So I want all over the walls here. And yeah, thank you so much for organizing to Waves, Subtle Asian Activists, and I'm forgetting the other groups. What's the third group? Sustainable, Subtle Asian.
Sustainable Asian Traits, but you're good.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I'd be down for contact information sharing, or even like a shared Google Doc on like advocacy priorities or something that, you know, how we can do mutual aid support type stuff if that exists.
Actually, I have an idea. Have y'all used Jamboard before?
Yeah. Maybe.
So basically, it's a Google app link thingy. So I just put in the chat. Everyone click on it. When it opens up, you'll see a bunch of pages. Don't worry about the different pages. They were originally for a small group activity, so we don't have to worry about that. But basically, click on the sticky note thing on the left-hand taskbar, the vertical one. And then on your sticky note, just write any contact information you'd like to share, like social media stuff, and or organizations that we should be supporting, donating, etc. as well. And then what we can do is we'll basically put this Jamboard link in the Google Slides that hopefully everyone here should have access to. And then we'll also put the Google Slides on the post of each of the 3 Facebook events we put out so that you guys have access to keep in touch and also look up anything you missed during the event.
Yeah, so I'm sharing my screen. This is the button you click for the sticky note. You just type into it and then you can move it around the page.
Okay, so it's just leave your, what is it, the name and like a contact thing, or
yep.
call to action or anything, or?
Yep, social media tag. So like it's here, I'll put as a template. So I'll put my Insta, my Facebook, and my email. Just give me 1 second. It's gonna upload.
Might also be helpful if like you introduced yourself as like just briefly if you want to connect with other people over specific interests, maybe just writing a short blurb about what you would like to get in touch with.
can quickly bring up a thing. So talked a little bit about this in the room, but I did my thesis on the environmentalisms of people who identify as BIPOC because I noticed that we were underrepresented in the environmental movement. And one of the things that I was kind of thinking about doing to kind of continue the work was to maybe start a podcast where I'm taught basically called Stories from BIPOC and the Environment, to talk to people about their various rich stories of environmentalism, environmental activism. So if anybody would be interested in talking with me about that, like please, yeah, please contact me. I am putting my stuff on the Jamboard right now. So yeah.
And it's a square looking thingy that's a sticky note when you hover over it on the left taskbar. It took me forever to find it, not gonna lie. Oh, just got your stuff, Tree. I'm gonna add it to the Jamboard.
While everyone is typing, does anyone want to just share what they wrote in their Jamboard if you want to reach out about specific things? Because I know it's like a limited amount of space on the sticky note.
I feel like this needs to have like more. I feel like as I'm typing, I'm like, this is not enough for me. But I'm also like, I don't want to take up so much space because there's like probably other people who have the same overlapping things. But I just put like my work's website. I'm based in Winnipeg, so I feel like I'm of the minority within the Turtle Island North America sphere. But if you do access, we do a lot of like peer support and workshops and just a lot of like different events. Mainly like my job is doing a lot of work with youth, so I'm the youth program coordinator. And in general, though, like I've also mentioned, I'm a volunteer with the Subtle Asian Mental Health under AMHC. So I also help around as well. And then I have my interests. So again, like podcasting, I feel like that's a trend. Everybody wants to start a podcast, and that's what I'm trying to do actually, because I have a grant that I need to fill out. So I'm trying to do that. And then I guess my other interests that people could see, I like to talk about intersectionality. It's just encompasses everything that I've mentioned. But yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I actually also have an interest in youth mental health, and I'm currently also working on like a thesis interviewing youth climate justice activists and seeing like its impact on youth mental health. So would love to connect on that as well. And yeah, both podcast ideas sound really cool. Also, Maggie, I know in our group you shared that you are working on a book. I know that it's not out yet, but I would love to stay connected and read it once it's out.
Yeah, for sure. Just message me. Thank you. And thank you for all the support, everyone.
Yeah, I'm glad. I want to uplift that. I appreciate both of you raising that as far as just having more peer presence, I guess, as far as Asian professionals and environment.
Awesome. If folks don't have anything else to share out, I'm going to close the recording right now. Just gonna hit the yes button.